Doncs ja. Doncs molt bona tarda a tothom. Moltíssimes gràcies per assistir a aquest seminari que ens fa molta il·lusió i que agraïm moltíssim a Jesús Fernández Domínguez que hagi acceptat la invitació que li hem fet a participar en els seminaris de recerca del grup. No ens coneixíem, però jo sabia que existia gràcies a un congrés que hi va haver a Eslovàquia l'any passat, a Košice, ara he canviat la palatal de lloc, en què ell va parlar la seva presentació era Between Low Productivity and Obsolescence, When Does an Affix Die? I jo vaig dir, ostres, és que aquest títol és magnífic, és superinteressant i vam dir, convidem-lo i que ens parli d'alguna cosa relacionada amb això, perquè normalment quan parlem de morfologia i parlem sobretot de productivitat i dels afixos productius i de tot el que passa amb els afixos que tenen tant de rendiment, però clar, això és a cost que n'hi ha uns altres que en deixen de tenir. I bé, li vam demanar que vingués a parlar d'això, o que volgués, i com ha dit, ell ha treballat a València, es va doctorar en lingüística anglesa per la Universitat de Jaén el 2008 i ara és professor titular de lingüística anglesa a la Universitat de Granada i la seva recerca, com es pot deduir, se centra en la morfologia lèxica anglesa, especialment en qüestions de productivitat morfològica, la composició del complement i el component cognitiu-semàntic de la formació de paraules. I res, torno a dir que estem molt contents que hagis acceptat la invitació i quan vulguis ara ja puedes compartir y empezar cuando quieras. Mil gracias.
Muy bien. Bueno, pues lo primero es agradeceros la invitación, que para mí fue una sorpresa y la verdad es que muy agradable. Estuve viendo la web del grupo y las actividades que hacéis y demás. Y bueno, pues vi nombres muy relevantes, gente que habéis tenido con este tipo de charlas y demás. Y bueno, pues verme yo ahí, pues la verdad es que me hizo mucha ilusión. Con lo cual, las gracias a vosotros. Me paso al inglés ya y enlazamos con la presentación, ¿vale? Well, I am sharing my presentation. I hope that you can see that well. If not, so please let me know. So the topic exactly is related to low productivity, and as Elisenda was saying, this is something that I've been looking at in the past 10 years, 10, 15 years, something like that. And the thing is that the tendency when we look at word formation studies is normally to look at the most productive processes. And that's, in fact, what I started doing myself when I was working on my PhD or even before in my MA dissertation. But then when you start having a look at the phenomena that surround us in language, you see that there are some other processes that are not so, they're not very successful, we could say, but they exist. They're there, they're available to us. So I've been interested by these processes and why they may be so poorly productive. Why do they disappear? Sometimes it looks like they disappear and then they come back. So my talk today focuses on this. So just to give some context on what we're discussing, I'm going to focus on affixation, and this is one very central phenomenon in word formation studies. But for some reason, there has been a split. Like there are productive processes and unproductive processes, according to some. And it's been only recently that gradients and partial productivity have been acknowledged. And in this case, what I've done is focus on three suffixes, which are dom, n, and th. So the pronunciation with the affix. And they are good examples of how this gradient behavior happens in present-day English. The thing is that when an affix or a process starts being poorly productive, it's sometimes difficult to explain why this is so. And I hope that these three illustrate different cases, and even if they are poorly productive, they are poorly productive in different ways and for different reasons. And I'm going to discuss this nature of productivity as a binary or gradient phenomenon, and this is going to take us to the nature of productivity as more qualitative or more quantitative. Yes, which there is not full agreement on this. So my central questions would be, how can we evaluate the productivity level of an affix, if we can at all? And when can we say that an affix is, we could say 100% unproductive, totally obsolete? Is there a point when we can say that? So what I'm going to target here is the evaluation of these three suffixes and see what corpus and dictionary values can tell us about their behavior. I'm going to consider if these metrics can be applied across these three affixes. And then I'd like to understand how gradients and specificity apply in productivity. So it's going to be, these three objectives have to be dealt with as a whole. It has to be an integral approach, but this is what I have in mind for this talk. So as I'm going to explain in a second, one of the steps that I took when looking at the data was the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary. And this was one of the first steps in the study, and I noticed that the way dictionaries use data affects our understanding of processes very, very clearly. So we have, in the case of the OED, we have documentation biases. So we know that there are chronological times which are favored, and other periods are practically dismissed. Some genres are very popular. Some registers are very popular, others are not so popular. And the thing is that some affixes happen in some registers or genres more than in others. So if a given genre is dismissed, then the suffixes or prefixes happening typically in those registers are going to be dismissed too. This is going to come up a bit later in my talk. The same happens with given texts or authors, which are more favored than others. We know that one clear example is that of male versus female authors throughout history. But this also happens if we think of authors coming from given countries or given cultures or beliefs who are more favored than others. So the data we have in dictionaries, as we know, is quite partial, we could say. We can't think of dictionaries as a neutral source of data. And this is not necessarily good or bad, but it's something that we have to bear in mind and be conscious of. In the case of the AD, we know that the tradition has concentrated on neologisms, new creations, which have been successful. And this makes sense, actually, because what we want in a dictionary is words that we look up because we need these words and we use them. So, yeah, this makes sense, but we could actually look at that the other way around. There may be words that we create on the spot for a given occasion, but then we don't need anymore. Or dictionary makers think we don't need anymore. Those words won't appear in a dictionary. So if we try to find words in a given dictionary, we, as a general tendency, are going to find words coming from productive, successful affixes in general, more than words coming from unproductive suffixes. So as you can see, there is a tendency where everything seems to favor high productivity, the study of high productivity. And just to name one example, yeah, we have the suffix, yes, suffix, so we don't know what it is exactly, ling, as in duckling, which persists in specific registers, but it basically doesn't appear or appears very rarely in general corpora. This was noted by Bertali some years ago. There's one of example of how a dictionary shows a different behavior in language use from what a corpus actually shows. Yeah, so it's two different kinds of sources of data. Okay. Okay, I also like to discuss the idea of fuzziness in grammar. We could say many things about the idea of fuzzy edges and the nature of categories and so on, but we have, from what I can see, two general views. Looking specifically at word formation, we have categorical views, which see many grammatical phenomena, including productivity, as either or. So we have Schulting, we have Aronoff, even Bauer at the beginning of his career was an author following this view, and they say that something is productive or it is not. Right. In recent years, the tendency has been different, and now we have more gradient approaches, starting with John Bybee, Hein Bayen, then we have construction morphology and related schools. And in this school, we could say, these schools, that there is always the opportunity for affixes to appear on a middle ground. It's not just a question of being 100% productive or 100% unproductive, but there is always the possibility of having a midway productivity, somewhere unclear, a gray area. And in these cases, we have to look not only at frequency, but also at usage by authors, by speakers. We can have nuances of meaning depending on how we use suffixes. There is the option of looking at polysemous or homonymous affixes. So let's say this second school is a bit more open in the way they understand language phenomena. In the case of productivity in particular, and looking at low productivity, there is, as I said a while ago, the idea of transitioning from low productivity to obsolescence. That is, we have affixes that are poorly productive, but which we still can use, even if they're rare, and they have a lot of constraints, and they appear in very specific registers, we still can use them. Versus others, which are dead, we could say. So this is what I'd like to look at, as I said, by looking at DOM, N, and TH, and I'm going to use corpus data and historical attestation. So that would be the OED. Okay, so there are different approaches of how we can study productivity. I'm going to very briefly outline 3 of them, which are the onomasiological approach, paradigmatic word formation would be another one, and then corpus-based approaches. I'm going to look at onomasiology, I'm going to look at construction models, and then I'm going to just mention one author who for me is, let's say, the father of modern studies in productivity. So to begin with, this onomasiological approach. So the purpose is, what I'd like to do is show how productivity can be understood differently. In this model, which has been going on for almost 30 years already, we have a qualitative view of productivity, which is actually an exception in nowadays word formation. Everything, I would say, almost everything else is quantitative in nature. So in Stackhauer's view, his theory says that processes are 100% productive, always. You can think of affixes, or be it suffixes or prefixes, conversion, blending, compounding of its many different types, clippings. So everything is 100% productive. But it is speakers who pick up what they want to say depending on their needs. But every process is 100% productive. So this is a, we could say, qualitatively oriented view of productivity. So the underlying notion here is that when a speaker can't use a given process, then Stackhauer's explanation is, well, it can be used at this point in time, but if this person is asked to produce the affix tomorrow or next week, then it may happen, right? So it's a very, as you see, a speaker-oriented view, and the speech community always has the last word in deciding what happens and what doesn't happen. And there is always a focus on attested words. So this theory rejects notions like possible word, potential word, over-generating capacity of the lexicon. So these notions coming from generative grammar are dismissed in this model. In contrast, the importance here is in the extralinguistic factors. So we may have very productive processes, unproductive processes, but the reason is not in the morphology itself. It is partly, but the ultimate reason is on the side of speakers who choose a given affix because it's fashionable, or because it expresses a given meaning in a nicer way, or because they simply want to use that affix consciously, on purpose. So you see, it's different reasons. And this makes this model very different from the rest, as I say. If some of you have looked at nomasiology and have tried to compare with other models and make comparisons in the practical or theoretical way, you will see that it's very difficult because the terminology is different, the methods are different, the conception of productivity is very different. So this makes everything, you have to adopt a different perspective. So that would be one model. Then we have construction-based approaches, which have been on the rise for the past 15, 20 years, maybe. Even more if we think of the earliest proposals, but very recently, you know, they are on the rise. So we have the parallel architecture proposed by Jakandov, and this is a highly generative proposal, which looks at productivity in a very similar way to what, I won't say Chomsky, but Chomsky partly, Aronoff, Halle, and all this school of people would see it, right? So it's like a revised version of generative view of grammar. Then we have relational morphology, which is proposed also by Jakandov and together with Jenny Audrey from the school of Gerd Boych. And in this case, we already have the notion of schemas. You know, schemas, which happen very frequently in construction grammar, and they are, let's say, the corresponding notion to a rule in more traditional terms. And they have very interesting ideas, for example, for low productivity, like notions like Habak affixes. So they're already aware that not everything in language is blooming with productivity and powerful. There are always isolated cases, poorly productive phenomena. One of them would be the TER ending in laughter, right? So it's a phenomenon that they, if I'm not wrong, they say it happens only in this word, so they call it an apex affix. It's an affix that has coined one word. And so the question is that a reason to say it is not very relevant? Well, it's relevant for me. It's relevant in a different way. So this is the point where I want to get. And I'd like to finish with there is a quotation by Jakandov where he says that productive patterns can be captured by schemas with exactly the same format as non-productive schemas. So the only difference is that one of them is listed in the lexicon. You see, this is a very traditional view of word formation and morphology and the lexicon, but unproductive schemas have to be listed because you need to memorize, while productive schemas have the same structure, but we can use them regularly. So it's, as you see, it's a different conception. Okay. And I wanted to finish by mentioning Laurie Bauer, who I think is probably an exception in this generalized trend in the study of productivity. When everyone has been looking at high productivity, very profitable processes, huge corpora and values of competing processes, while everyone was doing that, also Bauer himself, but he was also looking at poorly productive processes, rules that are disappearing, that are on the borderline between yes and no, and this is, for me, a big asset in what he does. So for him, it's not a low productivity, it's a type of productivity. He sees that as a different phenomenon. He sees low productivity as something that requires specific theories, specific method, and we can't apply the same methods that we use for high productivity for low productivity because it's something else. So he sees that there are factors that limit productivity. They may be morphological, phonological, semantic, pragmatic, etc. He bears in mind the diachronic weight in studying productivity because we need to know where we come from and understand where we're headed. And this is done only by looking at data from the past. One example would be the suffix step, which in principle is very limited, but it doesn't entirely die. It's surviving. So Bauer bears all this in mind. And then we have the notion of dead affixes. In this case, we have Bauer himself describing th or dom. My results are slightly different from what he argues, but the basic idea is the same. That the fact that these suffixes do not produce many words doesn't make them less relevant, right? This will be, I think, the bottom line here. Right, so I'm going to move on to how I got my data. And there are some things that we need to be careful with. I'm going through this very quickly because if we've worked with corpora, I think we're all aware of this. So corpus design, representativeness, and so on. I used the contemporary corpus of American English, corpus of contemporary American English, sorry, COCA. This is a general corpus. It has quite a wide range of genres and registers, but even so, we need to be aware that it won't contain examples of very, very specific texts because it's a general corpus. So when we study low productivity, this is something to bear in mind. Second caution. In general, the methods that we use for morphological research tend to favor the study of high frequency patterns, like suffixes which are very productive, like et versus ness, compounding of the very productive types, like noun-noun compounds, conversion, which is very, very productive as well. But if we apply these same methods to low productivity, we will get poor results. So we need to be on the lookout for this. And I will mention this in a while as well. Because if we don't, we are going to be missing the data. It's going to be slipping between our fingers, and we will miss data that is there, but it's very difficult to catch. And then we have hapax-based models when we study productivity. But again, they are very... the interpretation of the results of these models, and I'm thinking of the models by Harold Bayen. These models are very useful for large corpora, for productive suffixes, for comparisons between productive suffixes, but when we apply them to low productivity, they, as Evert and Luderin say, they leave no middle ground. So they don't leave the option of seeing something as halfway productive. So it's an either or, again. Okay, so what did I do with my data? My idea here was to target 3 suffixes which appear in a different, similar area in the productivity client, but they're not identical in how they behave. So in principle, dom is poorly productive, but is still active, perhaps. Then we have n, which is poorly productive, but is so-so, its status is less clear. And then we have th, which is poorly productive, but almost completely dead. So what I did was look at COCA in the most recent time range that we are allowed to use, which is 2015, 2019. And I retrieved the units, and in dom, n, and th, with the idea of diagnosing synchronic phenomena, so very recent phenomena. Because if I used the whole COCA corpus, I think the earliest texts come from the 1990s, and this would give me values that I don't want to use because that's 30 years ago already, and they're not really representative of what I have in mind. Okay, I got the data, and then I have to filter irrelevant results like misspellings, elements that happen to finish in a given sequence of letters but are not suffixes. So I don't know, gluten. This was one of the elements that I got when I searched for words ending in n. Of course, you have to remove gluten because it's not a derivative. Typos like strength, there is a missing n. And then we have examples like bandwidth, which it ends in th indeed, but it's actually in the derivation cycle, the last process to be applied is the compound band plus width and not wide width. So bandwidth wouldn't count as a token of what I had in mind. Okay, I had the data, then I checked every item in the OED. I got etymological information, part of speech, frequencies, level of usage, because the OED distinguishes, I think it's 8 levels of usage from 1 to 8, more to less common in language. Then I looked at morphophonological conditions. So N suffixes had to derive from, N units had to derive from adjectives, so red, redden. Dumb had to be creations from nouns, and th from adjectives. The purpose of doing this was to make sure that I was looking at the same word formation rule. So I wanted the same input lexeme, type of input lexeme, and the same type of output lexeme. And here are a few examples of these units. So words ending in dom, like fandom, teendom, earldom, lucerdom. Words in n, redden, moisten, dampen, sharpen. And words in th, depth, wealth, truth, length. And I got, initially, you can see this on the table. Initially, I got quite a few examples, quite a few. So if you see example for th, so it's more than 1,674, which is a lot. But once you apply the screening stage and you filter and you clean your data, you see that the difference in the value. I had to keep 18 examples, because in the case of th, you have the suffix used for numerals, and this accounted for a very large number of the data. So yeah, we have to do some cleaning. So eventually I got 49 units for dom, 39 for n, 18 for th. Right. So let's have a look at what we initially get in these results. Okay, so dom, you have 49 types, which, as we said, is a very clear domination. It's the example, the affix that we have most types from. And then n, 39, not bad. th, 18. We already see a contrast between dom n and th, right? The total number of units, the number of types, doesn't favor th. And that provisionally may mean that no new words are created. Okay, we'll see. The mean frequency, very high mean frequency of th. When I say frequency here, I mean not type frequency, which was the first graph, but token frequency. And this, in combination, if we combine few types, as happened in the first graph, few types, with many tokens, this combination, the relationship between those two factors, is a very strong indication that, one, we have few words, very few words being created, which are used repeatedly, high token frequency. So the results are not very promising for th, right? This is what we can see. First attestation, dom and n are active. Even relatively recently, from the 15th century on, even in the 20th century, we have a few creations in dom and in n. I'll give you examples in a second. Not so with th. th was active in Old English, but no new form has been created in quite a few centuries. And this is, again, a strong signal of what may be happening. And finally, units which don't appear in the OED. And in this case, only dom shows forms which do not appear in the OED, which may be taken as a sign of neology, because if a form doesn't appear in a dictionary, it depends on the kind of dictionary, of course, but one reason may be that it's new and that it has gone unnoticed to lexicographers. There may be other reasons, right? But if we put together the occurrence in the OED, the attestation dates, the types, and the tokens, you see that we already have a picture of what may be happening at this point. Okay, right, so let's look at each affix in some detail. So dom, we have a few examples. As we said, there are 49 forms. There are lexicalized forms, but also new formations. There are also a few new formations. And what is interesting is that high frequency forms happen together with low frequency forms. Many of them hapaxes. I don't know if I mentioned this before. You probably know, but hapaxes are units that appear just once in a corpus. If you look at the examples that you can see at the bottom, prankdom would be a hapax, nigadom, hipsterdom, junkiedom, teenagerdom. All those are forms that count as hapaxes. So in this suffix, what we have is very frequent formations. You see, if you look at the table, you see freedom, wisdom, kingdom, geekdom. Those are very frequent, together with new formations which are very register specific. Some of them appear close to slang language. So you see, it's a combination of both. You have both, a little bit of both. And in the tendencies of the frequency values, this is represented as well. You have a few words which are very, very frequent, which are freedom, kingdom, boredom, and a few more, but the top line, together with some new forms. This is very characteristic of residual productivity. But residual means still a sign of productivity. So there is some indication that DOM is still able to create new words. If you look at the last bullet point that we are looking at now, there are even some neologisms after the first half of the 20th century, like hipsterdom, cleandom, yuppidom, junkiedom, which have one or two tokens. So, well, it's not a productive, very, very productive suffix, but it still has some lexical capacity for creation, right? So this would be the case of DOM. And this would be the examples that I find quite representative. They reflect socio-cultural labels very clearly. Geekdom, yuppidom, coupledom. You can see the attestation dates, and this reflects, I think, the fact that DOM is able to catch up with tendencies and to be used, perhaps ironically, perhaps in a given socio-cultural way, but it's still able to catch up with the tendencies of speakers' needs. Okay. Then we have N. As we said, N has 39 forms, and this, I think, would be a case of what we call lexical entrenchment. That is, it's units that are highly fixed in our lexicon. On the table, we have widen, tighten, soften, neaten, steepen. So their meanings are very clear. It's difficult for these words to disappear, at least if nothing different happens to the language tendencies in the past centuries, I would say. So we know what these words mean very well. But there is not a very big potential for creation, as happened with DOM. So we have these lexically entrenched words, but we don't have as many new words. Some examples of words in N. We have tighten. The number in brackets is the coca frequency, okay? We have tighten, broaden, widen, quicken, thicken, stiffen, whiten, cheapen, roughen. And you may think, I think I'm discussing this on the next slide, but you may think out of these examples of whiten. In what sense? That perhaps if you want to say this product is going to whiten your shirt, if you want to express that kind of meaning, perhaps what many people would say instead is this product is going to make your shirt white. So it would be an analytic construction. Make X white instead of whiten. So this has been a big competitor for the N suffix, right? This is what I'm calling here the wall of phonology. There is an important constraint to what kind of basis you can have in the suffix, but also we have alternatives like make big versus biggen, which for different reasons have become more frequent. So is it that you can say whiten? No, you can say whiten, and in fact it's attested. But in our everyday language, we have this periphrastic construction, which is more common, right? So what we are saying is that in contrast to DOM, N has a few verbs with high productivity, but no expanding productivity. This is a term term again by Harold Bayen. So no new words are created. In fact, after 1850, I couldn't find any of those, okay, after the mid-19th century. Right, and we move on to TH, which, as we said, has 18 forms only. It has been called, I liked this label by Lass in 1997, a victim of phonological structuring. So language has changed so much that TH has been cornered, and it finds it very difficult or impossible to create new words. In fact, 100% of the words I found have an Old English origin. No new formations after 1150. And that's many years with no new formations, okay? So we have pure lexical storage, no morphological decomposition, which means when we see truth, perhaps we are an exception because we are morphologists, but people in general don't see a connection between true and truth because they have to store the lexeme, okay? So this is a fossilized inventory. Okay, examples of words in TH. We have health, death, truth, growth, warmth, width, stealth, filth, mirth, girth. Notice the frequencies. If you remember the frequencies we were looking at before, they were much lower. This is all very, very high frequent terms. What do we find in the frequency patterns? That nine terms account for almost 100% of all the frequency. So we have the top 9 items from health up to depth, I think, depth or warmth in the figure you can see. They occupy most of the activity of the lexicon. So the extralinguistic realities are general concepts. If you compare these to words which we saw like UPDOM or geekdom, these are not that specific. These are almost universal notions, right? Concepts that, if you think, were coined almost a millennium ago, and they have to refer to a different kind of reality. Okay, so this is the 3 affixes separately. And now I'd like to put some of the facts together. Frequency, competitors, and constraints. So we have that DOM has suffered semantic narrowing. The kind of meaning it expresses is more limited today, and it has 2 competitors. Perhaps the strongest one would be conversion or zero derivation, and also the suffix hood, but to a lesser extent, mainly conversion. Then we have N, whose main constraint, if you remember, was the nature of the lexical basis, the fact that they have to end, the lexical base has to end in an obstruent, so a strong phoneme, and analytics. When it says analytics here means this periphrastic make big versus begin. And competitors are these causatives and if-I. And then we have TH, which has the phonological opacity and upload as a big constraint. And it has many competitors, actually. I chose ness because it's a very frequent one, but TH has a lot of competitors nowadays. Okay. How about formations? Do these affixes create new words? In DOM, we have a low capacity, but it's non-zero capacity. So if you remember, there were some words created after the 1950s, and that's something. That's yesterday. If we look at the history of language, that's a while ago, we could say, right? How about the frequency of the older words? High. It's high frequency because productivity is low. So what's the status of DOM? Let's say residual. We could say residual. What about N? Any recent output? None. No words created after the mid-19th century. And what is the frequency of the words that existed previously? It's high frequency, but not extremely high. So let's say moderate. The status blocked. Let's say it's on hold, right? N could be understood as being on hold. Not dead, but blocked. And TH. Recent output, none whatsoever. The frequency of the all forms is very high, and the status, I think, indications are that it's extinct. And meaning. Of course, if we want to use a word, the word needs to be able, sorry, if we want to use a suffix, the suffix needs to express a category, a meaning that we find it relevant. This is a truism, I'm aware, but it's there. We have to bear it in mind. So what meanings do these suffixes express? Dumb expresses abstract, collective states, and perhaps social identities more peripherally. This is relevant nowadays, right? We can have notions that can be expressed by means of dumb. What about n? The meaning is the causative one, like we said, make red, make big, and so on. So it's relevant as well. There is an evaluative nuance to these semantics, but that's not a problem, I think. It's not highly pejorative, for example, suffix. It's not that. So it's pragmatically relevant, we could say. What about th? Well, you use it for abstract notions. And as we saw a while ago, you normally use it in archaic. Perhaps archaic is too categorical as an adjective, but you see the kind of word that you use when you employ this suffix. Truth, length, width. So it's like these notions that we don't actually come across very frequently to create new of them, right? They are there, they are very relevant, but we don't need to apply them recurrently. So when it comes to the distribution, and this is the corpus data, we see that the suffix dom is highly skewed. So the suffix, the conjugates are marginal, but they do exist. N is moderately skewed. TH is bimodal. That is, it's, as we said, an either or, right? This is an overview of what we were looking at before. So in this case, we see that low productivity is the way we would describe all three suffixes, but there are differences. So one of them is residual, the other is blocked, the other is extinct. So the thing is that nonce output here has to be the only evidence, perhaps, that we have that an affix is still surviving. The only case in my example, in my study, is dumb. That's the only suffix able to create new words. Very sporadically, very rare, very infrequent words, but they do happen. So how do we process everything we're saying? There is a quotation from an author. This comes from a novel, short story or novel, I don't remember, but there is the idea that speakers know more than they can tell. So it's curious that we have this intuition, which is obviously we need that as speakers of languages. And when we try to prove that with corpora or with dictionaries, sometimes we don't find what we need to find. And this is, for me, a very important indication in the case of low productivity. These intuitive feelings, the way you use a word or you don't use a word, or you may use it, but you're reluctant because you don't like the sound of it. So this is, I think, very relevant for low productivity. And this, as we said before, low frequency forms like mirth and girth are processed as wholes. I don't work in psycholinguistic areas, so I don't have access to experiments myself, but if you've read the literature, you know that this is a very basic feature of morphologically opaque forms. There is no decomposition in terms of base, suffix, and so on, but you need to look at everything. And now the big question. Can we ever say that an affix is dead? Can we declare any affix dead, knowing that it won't come back to lexical activity? Well, dumb has been described as dead for decades. It was described as practically extinct. It was defunct. Okay. And then suddenly you get geekdom, right? So, and now what? Was it dead, or what's happening with it? It's a problem, because when we have an onomasiological need, that is, when we need to give a name, we will find whatever resource we need. If not th, then et, if not dom, but it's there. However, th in particular has been unproductive for 900 years. So this looks like very probably total unproductivity. But we need to bear in mind that something is the productivity of the community and something different is the individual creative productivity. Yes, this will be a different topic, but we have to distinguish from creations that happen, for example, in corpora, in dictionaries, which in principle represent the community, from individual acts. Yeah, because if we start considering these individual acts as representative of productivity, then it's going to be very difficult to say that an affix is dead, because anyone can always make up a word and the affix is already happening. Okay, so just I'm going to be finishing very soon. Yeah, okay, so this goes back actually more to philosophy of language than to grammar itself. Leibov, when explaining cognition and categories in and the understanding of the world, he says he distinguishes three types of categories that we use to explain reality. We have category type 1, type 2, type 3. Type 1 is bounded and non-graded. That is, the limits are rigid. There is yes, no membership. And if you belong to a category, you don't belong to the other one. So clear cut. Okay, that's type 1. Type 2 has both features. It's bounded and graded. So there are limits, but we have prototypes would be a good example here. Some members are better examples of the category like others. Think of the famous experiments of the cat of what is a bird. A bird. This is a bird, and this is a dog. Very clear categories. But within the category bird, some examples are better examples, like the sparrow being a very good example of a bird, what we have in mind as a bird, and a penguin still being a bird is not such a good example, right? And then we have type 3 categories, which are not bounded and graded. So this is the fact of some members going through categories like a fluid notion. Peripheral members have to do with members of other categories. They're not very strong categories, strong contrasting categories. So you see, it's different types of understanding reality. Type 1, type 2, type 3. So what I think here is, what do we need when we explain productivity? Do we need to understand productivity as a category 1 phenomenon? So do we need edges, high productivity, semi-productivity, no productivity? Is it that? Or do we need a type 3 phenomenon, going from more to less, so fuzzy edges? But this type 3 category would be difficult. I mean, it's difficult to measure. In the theory, it may make sense, but then we have to empirically validate that, which is where the problem comes, okay? Right. This one I'm going to skip if you don't mind, because I've been discussing these ideas previously. So I'm going to come to the conclusions. So based on the data and on what I think of this phenomenon is about, I think that the transition here is gradual. Transition from productivity to obsolescence has to be dealt with if we want to be faithful to reality and to language. We have to look at number of types, number of tokens, attestation dates, who uses languages, who uses language in what registers. So we put all that together, and then we may have the full picture of what may be happening. And this is what I've tried to do in this presentation. There were 3 processes which were poorly productive and whose peak use happened decades or centuries ago. And what we've seen is that DOM is marginal, so it has a very specific niche productivity, very specific one, but it's still happening somehow. Then we have N, which is lexically strong, so the terms that you find, where you find N, are very strong, they are very frequent, but the process is non-productive. It hasn't been so for 100 years or so. And then we have TH, which, as we said, is fossilized, and it has been so for quite a while. Okay, for me, the especially difficult thing is to tell the difference between poorly productive and unproductive. So the difference between high and low is okay, and it can be justified. But the difference between 1% and 0% is the tricky one. And I still haven't been able to definitely know which measures, which models to use to explain this transition, which must happen somehow. I was speaking of these categories by label, the type 1, type 2, type 3. So probably the terminology in morphology and in word formation, productive, non-productive, obsolescent, unavailable, have led us to use type 1 categories or terms for what actually is a type 3 phenomenon. That is, we're trying to force rigid edges, very strong categories on a phenomenon which is gradual, that is productivity. And of course, there is a mismatch, and we can force the theoretical apparatus into the reality of the data we see. So this is why, well, probably we have so many problems in explaining this. So I think this is something that productivity models should bear in mind. It hasn't been done very frequently, with a few exceptions, but I think this is the way to go, to include gradients, competition, transparency. We have to bear this phenomena in mind for a complete theory, because a full language theory is not just about high productivity. Everything we've been seeing today is language as well, and we need to explain it. Then there is this idea of the tacit morphological knowledge, which I said comes within each one of us. This sounds very philosophical, but I think there is some reason for that. So we have our intuitions of when, where to use things. So I think this has to be taken into account as well. Okay, sorry. Yeah, and so the future. So again, use corpus-based work, use spoken corpora, genre-specific data, marginal registers, slang language. This is very often what this kind of phenomena happen. Look at psycholinguistic experiments, which I think can shed light on how we use low-frequency words and on why speakers prefer this against this, okay? And then computational modeling. I think these three paths would be interesting to explain together with everything I've said, but we need to combine these different models together so that we can explain why something is used a lot and why something else is used very rarely, and so on. So that would be it from me. Here are a few references which you know already. If not, I can share them later. And this was it from me. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Pues muchísimas gracias por todo lo que nos has explicado y que, bueno, yo he apuntado como una loca, pero...
un poco denso para esta hora de la tarde, ¿no?
Ahora ya al menos ya no me da el sol y además he podido apuntar mejor. Seguro que hay preguntas, observaciones, comentarios. ¿Ver? Espera, sí. Espera, hasta aquí. Aquí. Is it possible to say the difference between poorly productive and unproductive may be assessed qualitatively? Well, rather than statistically, and that is okay.
Jose knows where to shoot. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yes, you're very right. The difference between productive and unproductive may be assessed qualitatively. Yeah, the problem is, for me, what is the criterion to say that something is a valid neologism? So is it, imagine, let's say dumb. Let's use dumb. Let's create a word with dumb. I don't know, teacherdom. I don't know if that exists or it doesn't. So I made it up as I go. Is that valid? So what measures do we use to say that this is a valid neologism or it isn't? So because morphologically it's there. I made it up. It's a noun, sorry, it's a noun that comes from another noun. It has the suffix, so it's there. But is it pragmatically valid? Does it have any usefulness actually? So the question for me is, how do we create that? How do we measure that? If you mean creative coinages that we find and that are attested, then yes, completely. Then the answer for me at least is yes. Attested in corpora or in dictionaries or in psycholinguistic experiments with participants, then yes. But if not, where is the limit? That's the problem for me with these creations, is where is the limit between using your morphology and then being consciously making an effort to create a new word? So the answer is yes, but I don't know how. So yes, but I would need to know how to do it. Yes. Do you have any ideas?
Sorry, can you hear me? It's just my okay. Right. No, that was a very interesting question. I have no idea about this. It's actually a question that you discussed at the very end of your presentation, and I agree that it's very difficult to, because we usually we center on the differences between high productivity and low productivity, but we never question whether an affix is poorly productive or non-productive. So it makes me think whether the reasons, the motivations behind it is actually found in the onomasiological approach, for example, which is something I tried a few years ago with two suffixes, O and E, diminutive ones. And I did so because I couldn't do it statistically. So perhaps, but again, I was not trying to approach this statistically, not because I was more into onomasiological approaches, but it was because I didn't find any like solid data to see how one of them was fully productive or not. So yeah, I agree with you. It's a very difficult, problematic boundary here. But again, I'm talking to you and I'm thinking.
Okay, thanks a lot. If you come up with any idea or you have some feedback, please keep in touch. Keep in touch.
Thank you, Jesus.
You're welcome.
Louise?
Yeah, thanks. This was a really great talk. I have, I don't know, various suggestions. Maybe I'll just give two quick ones. One is, I think, thinking about the problem as really, so I guess I would be in favor of saying just assume that anything is possible. So take really like the big tent approach and think of the problem as explaining when things are more productive as opposed to worrying about so I guess what I would say is the continuum approach, I think, makes a lot of sense, because you can always think if there are things that are really 100% productive, it's just like the limiting case of a partially productive phenomenon. But the one suggestion I would make is to also think about like expressive needs a little bit more and the semantics of the base. So those TH words, they are, at least the ones that I looked at, I wrote a little paper on this a few years ago about just the subset of these words that are derived from dimensional adjectives. And I mean, these are like very, very basic concepts. And, so given that there's a phonological, there's a lot of opacity in those, right? As you pointed out, I mean, it's not really surprising that that has sort of just fallen by the wayside as a useful way of creating new meanings, but also like you're not, if you think about analogical processes of change that or a vocabulary building that would maybe kind of pick up on rarer, sometimes subgeneralizations or subpatterns persist because there's sufficient similarity in the concepts that are being developed, that sort of thing. I mean, maybe in that domain also, you're just not going to have concept growth, because height, width, length, and so forth are just like such basic things. Whereas like it's a bit different with the DOM, case.
Thanks a lot. That makes a lot of sense. And it actually takes us, I think, to the basic function of language, which is we use language because we need it. So the moment a given process doesn't have the semantic pragmatic profile that you need, then you basically won't use it. And perhaps the explanation is as simple as that. And we are trying to find the morphology of the base and the phonetics and the frequency evidence and so on. And perhaps the explanation is simpler, which is actually most important, the essential thing. So what do we need words for? Thank you. Would you mind later if I contact you to give me this reference of your paper? So because I'd like to have a look at that.
Yeah, okay. Sure. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Darren?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, thanks for a really, really interesting talk. I like what you said about the difference between individual creativity and the possibility of anything being possible versus a thing that's frequently attested in corpora, etc. But there's kind of an edge case. These are these like humorous affixations, like embiggen, for example, which was like a hapax form for 100 years. And then along came The Simpsons, and for some, I don't know, in the 90s, for some like humorous or ironic intent. It's just frequently, fairly frequently used, probably a counterexample to saying that the N suffix is dead. So, I mean, there will always be some reason for creating a word, even if it's just a humorous or ironic one or some pragmatic intent that could explain possibility. And because of the way the internet works, media works, this could be amplified to such an extent that it's frequently attested.
Yes, I make a note. Thank you. I make a note of what you just said about the internet and the fact that, yes, the other day I was typing something because I play guitar and I was trying to find something about a song, and I found a text written by myself 15 years ago. So this is what you're saying now. These sporadic words or non-formations, or however you want to call them, many of them don't disappear. So this is not like someone using a text or giving word in a text in the 15th century and the word, it's gone. Now it's not gone. So again, we're going back, and I think this connects somehow with Jose's remark before about the creative use of language, individual versus non-individual. And the problem here is, when can we say that something has gone from being locally productive, because for some reason I like this suffix and I use it a lot, I joke and I do things with this suffix. From what point can we say this has gone from me to the community? This is the issue here, or one of the issues. So how do we need attestation? Because yes, if there is no evidence, how can we measure that? Yeah, I think this is very relevant, but I am afraid I don't have a solution. I don't have an answer for this. I've made a note of your suggestion, and I'll work on this, because I wouldn't. No, thank you. Thank you. It was a very good point.
Perdón. Antes de dar la palabra a José, hay una pregunta en el chat de Lara Ahmed, que es estudiante de máster, que dice: "Thank you for the talk, super interesting. I'm curious why you chose to include only noun into noun derivations of DOM, excluding adjective into noun ones, for example, freedom or wisdom?
Yes, that's a good question. Yes, I wasn't very clear there. Because the way I see word formation, those would be, for me, there would be two different processes. So one would be noun, dom, noun, so dom, which creates nouns from nouns, and dom, which creates nouns from adjectives, would be another process. They probably are polysemous. It's a polysemous suffix, but it creates two different, it's like two really different roots, we could say. So I wanted to be very strict here, and I focused just on one of them, which was noun. I could have done the other one, yes. In fact, I may have to, but then the reason was that. I don't know, Lara, I don't know if that makes any sense to you.
That answers my question. Thank you.
No? Okay.
Jose?
Yeah. It's just a brief comment. In your presentation, you mentioned the word geekdom, right? And it was like an important point in DOM trend in productivity. Geekdom, right?
Geekdom, yeah.
Yeah, it was really interesting, and it makes me wonder whether we should look at the I don't know what you call it, the ontological references or the world knowledge of the base, or the model word or leader word in the sense of molecules. You know, when you look at the word kingdom and how it is represented through geekdom, and how the new words or the potential words that will be formed are accessed through geekdom because of particularly because of our kingdom, and how kingdom is recursed in a way, because we need to access certain ontologies on the in the internet, and we need to create new kingdoms, new territories, new boundaries. You know what I mean? So perhaps one of the motivations behind these changes of productivity, especially in the case of DOM, has to do with the new ontologies, the new word knowledge that they need to be conquered. They need to be fulfilled, by creative or creativity makers. So I think Malkia was right in saying that leader words and model words are essential. When he described, the way shopaholic was made out of workaholic, this was more relevant to the productivity of holic than alcoholic itself. So if we look at these model words, we see that they are relevant to the change of productivity rather than the affixes themselves.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I hadn't thought. You think in terms of analogy and so on, right?
Yeah, exactly. Within a more cognitive framework, perhaps, looking at the ontologies that are non-existent. Was created, perhaps. But obviously, I'm speculating here because I don't know when geekdom emerged, or I don't know. It's just a guess.
Yeah, no, but you're right, and I think this is something I hadn't thought of. And the example that you gave of holic, that I think it applies very well to this example. The evolution from kingdom and similar words to the other similar formations, where perhaps their role is not so much the weight, the influence is not on the suffix, but on the word, the full word, the lexeme itself. Thank you for that, Jose.
Giovanni Tallarico.
Hola, buenas tardes. Giovanni Tallarico, University of Verona. I hope you can hear me all right. And thank you very, very much for your talk. And I would also like to thank Judith Freixa, who told me that there was this seminar. I was in Barcelona a couple of weeks ago. I'm not a morphologist. I work in neology, which is somehow related to, very much related actually, to the topic that you dealt with today. And I was thinking about a few things when you mentioned the boundaries, which are not clear-cut. We have the same thing in neology between occasionalisms and neologisms. And for example, Judith has a strong view of what the neologism is and what the neologism is not. But in French tradition, because I work in French, there is not such a clear-cut boundary. Okay, so also instances of, sorry for my voice, instances of lexical creativity can be considered as neologisms. Okay, as for the dilemma that you are facing, how to differentiate between polyproductive and unproductive forms, actually, from a neological perspective, I would only work on outputs. Okay, so we start from corpora. It's as basic as that, but it depends, of course, on how representative they are. We have on Sketch Engine corpora with really milliard, I don't know how to say, of words, and if there are no productive suffixes, over time we realize it. Another way is to look into dictionaries, because we have a list of words which have been registered in dictionaries lately or in the last 20 years. So if we see that there are no new forms with that, so we have a clue. And as for the methodological part, here's my question. How did you filter the results? Did you use a stop list? For example, in neology, we do that. So we extract all words from corpus, a word list, and then we want to single out the potential neologism. So we can use a stop list, and in that case, you would have found the words which are not in a dictionary. So no wisdom, no truth, no birth, and so on. So this maybe might be a cue. Just a small detail for Lady Dom, maybe I saw it in your list of Dom. I think it's a truncated form, if I'm not mistaken, okay. Domination. So maybe you can leave it out. And here, these were only like sparse thoughts on the subject. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot for these remarks. So, yeah, you mentioned the idea of working on output. I agree that this is perhaps the most, if not reliable, the most objective way to do it. My problem here is, for example, what limits do you set for each case? So in this example, okay, the 3 affixes I was looking at, let's say if I had limited myself to no attestation in the last 30 years and similar corpus frequencies, the results would have been the same, because none of these affixes has created new words. Their corpus frequencies are slightly different, a bit higher for TH, but they would look the same. So the problem is, do you go, so instead of 30 years back, do you go 40 years or 50, or does it have to be 100, 200? So that is the thing here. We can't go, or I think we shouldn't go to a tailor-made model for each affix, because if we do that, what we are doing is adapting our needs to perhaps what we think should happen for each of them. I'd like to find a method where this can be applied more generally. So I agree with your idea of focusing on the output, but when I start looking and I get down to the practice itself, it becomes very tricky. It becomes, and in this case, it was perhaps 3 very unproductive affixes. It was not so problematic, but in other cases, I find it quite challenging, right? So, but thank you for that. And you were mentioning, you mentioned the idea of ladydom. Thank you for that, but I think you mentioned something else. Did I answer your questions, or is there anything?
Yes, perfectly. Maybe there is a need to create a new model for morphological productivity. In that case, you can set your own standards, and it's open to discussion, of course, because I don't know, we are in 26. If in the last 26 years nothing has been created and attested in very large corpora like, I don't know, JSI or 1010 corpora, there is, I think, quite a strong evidence about that. But it's up to researchers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Alba.
Thank you. Hi, Jesus. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was really interesting. As Elisenda mentioned, we've been working with morphopragmatics for a while, and I was wondering, thanks to Jose's last comment, I just wanted to add that, at least in my case, when I think of geekdom, the first word that comes to my mind is fandom, even before kingdom. So I think Jose's intuition, whatever we want to call it, might be right. But in this case, I think there is a closer word, more modern word that maybe speakers think about before kingdom, because of, well, it's kind of an outsider's world that contains people who are not, I would say, who haven't got common interests or normal interests. So I just wanted to point that out, and following also on what Geraint said, because he said something like, even when these words are created, because there's some kind of humor behind it or intention. I think that those are the cases where maybe more thought is actually given to the formation of the word, because you want to convey a specific feeling, you want to get some kind of reaction from your reader, your hearer. So I think that's even those cases, and of course these are the cases that I'm interested in, so that's why, but I think that those are even more relevant and interesting when we try to find an explanation to what's going on and an answer to your question, Jesus. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Very interesting comments. I appreciate your feedback, because if you see me typing, I'm making notes here for future research. And I think I'm very thankful, because I see that you've been paying a lot of attention, and your feedback is very insightful. I was looking, if you give me a second. Yes, how you were mentioning fandom, and I at least had the impression that fandom was a recent creation. I wouldn't say the 21st century, but I was thinking of the 1980s, 1990s, like this phenomena related to some music band or movie. And then I checked the OED, and it was attested in 1903, so the beginnings of the 20th century, with the same meaning, right? And I don't say that there was a meaning and then there was a new sense or connotation of the same meaning more than 100 years ago. And now I don't know about you, but my feeling is that it's been around for 20 years, 20, 30 years. This is my feeling. So this is something to bear in mind as well. So the word has been there for more than a century, but it's been latent, maybe. It has passed unnoticed, and now suddenly it pops up. It goes, as Jose says, the creation goes. There is a bloom in dumb forms, and then you see it everywhere. So this is what we want to try to explain. Still don't know how, but we're there.
Wow. Se está yendo ya mucha gente y sabe mal porque nos estamos alargando. Yo quería hacer una pregunta que no quiere abrir otro gran tema, pero estamos hablando mucho de sufijos. ¿Qué pasa con los prefijos? Porque los prefijos parece que siempre están disponibles y que no. También hay unos que son más productivos o no sé, hiper, súper, mega ya no lo es tanto, pero de repente lo que ya ha salido, ¿no? Que factores extralingüísticos pueden incidir para que en un momento determinado se dispare el uso de un prefijo. Y yo cuando ibas a hablar tal, yo pensaba, claro, es que a mí solo se me ocurre un prefijo que al menos en catalán y en español, si no es obsoleto, le faltan, no sé, un poquito, que es el prefijo no lo sé decir, causativizador a, de callar a callar, ara me saldran todos en catalán, seure a seure, geure a geure, que és un prefijo es eso, que simplemente causativiza verbos que no lo son y que de hecho son verbos con un argumento y pasan a tener dos y que parece una lista muy cerrada y que yo creo que ya no está disponible para los hablantes y que es, pues eso, casi lexicalizado, aunque se puede identificar y que lo podamos encontrar en otras lenguas, porque en alemán tienes el B que sí que también causa lo mismo, ¿no? Danken, bedanken, etc. Bueno, entonces, el resumen es, siempre pensamos mucho en los sufijos, porque yo creo que hay más competencia entre ellos, o no sé, ¿se podría aplicar esto mismo igual a los prefijos? Es que a mí me sale que no pasa exactamente lo mismo.
Yo creo que sí. Perdón. Yo creo que sí. El tema es que los prefijos ya... Yo también tengo esa sensación de que el foco de atención se va a la sufijación. Y la prefijación se queda un poco, por algún motivo que no sé yo realmente, hay muchísimos menos estudios en prefijación. Pero sí que se podría aplicar igualmente. Lo que pasa es que habría que ver la naturaleza de sufijos, porque, por ejemplo, estos tres que yo he visto hoy son nativos del inglés y muchos de los más productivos, de los prefijos más productivos en inglés, pues tienen origen latino o griego, como super, mega, hiper. Entonces, son cosas que tener en cuenta, pero sí que lo veo muy interesante y, vamos, enlaza perfectamente con lo que estamos hablando aquí. Sí. No había pensado yo en el prefijo que has dicho de callar. Sí, ese probablemente ya sea un resto de unidades que quedan ahí, pero formaciones nuevas.
Yo no las he encontrado nunca.
Hombre, nosotros somos nativos de español, que debería salirnos relativa facilidad, ¿no? Si estuviera... Y a mí no me sale ninguna.
No, parece muy... ¿Y qué es eso? Que además tienes otros recursos, tienes el sufijo izar, ificar si se dan las condiciones, o ya pues una construcción o hacer. Bueno, de hecho, incluso encuentras mucho más frecuentemente hacer callar que no acallar.
De sobra.
Creo que algunos hablantes, no sé, hablantes más jóvenes, yo creo que ni entenderán qué es acallar sin contexto.
Ahora se lo voy a decir a mi hija de 14 años y luego te mando un mensaje.
Yo creo que además este es el problema, que acaban siendo estructuras muy opacas, ¿no? En el caso del prefijo A, claramente, porque no es el A negativo, es una cosa muy distinta.
Claro.
¿No?
Y qué buen punto ese, Elisenda, ese está muy bien, ¿eh?
Uy, Luis nos hace un poco de publicidad en el chat sobre un par de artículos.
Me lo guardo, sí. Y arriba, occasionalisms in French, vale. Qué bien. Pues me lo guardo también.
Y luego, solo otra cosa que ha salido, yo creo que es súper importante. Claro, decimos, es que tenemos cuerpos muy grandes, pero es que los cuerpos que tenemos son fundamentalmente escritos y hay fenómenos que no se encuentran. Porque yo iba pensando en algunos sufijos que a Alba y a mí nos gustan especialmente y no salen si no es en un contexto absolutamente informal, básicamente oral, y que entonces incluso quedan excluidos de descripciones gramaticales, de diccionarios, etcétera, porque son de un registro del cual se siguen ocupando menos este tipo de estudios, ¿no? Y hace falta poder incluir, pues...
Totalmente de acuerdo. Sí, fíjate, Coca, que lo conocemos todos, me imagino que todos lo usamos, sabemos. Yo no sé por cuánto va, qué tamaño va ya, 20 billones, es que no sé qué tamaño tiene ya. Pero yo creo que todo es escrito. Lo poco que hay oral es de tipo prensa o noticias, que son textos ya escritos. Eso no cuenta como oral. Eso sigue siendo escrito. Entonces, que el corpus más grande y de los más utilizados sigan siendo así, claro, limita mucho. Yo creo que de los que más tiene de componente oral es el BNC, que tiene un 10% sobre 10% escrito, 10 oral, 90 escrito, pero claro, el BNC ya tiene casi 40 años y no es muy grande. Entonces, claro, ya las limitaciones, pues Sí, eso es, claro, ¿cuánto cuesta compilar un corpus oral? Que es la segunda parte. Está, Alba quiere añadir aquí.
Sí, perdón, es que tengo una tutoría y me tengo que ir, pero yo creo que el tema ahora mismo, hoy en día, ya no es tanto oral, sino que simplemente el contexto, porque si podríamos coger los comentarios que hace la gente en los streams de Twitch, por ejemplo, y eso es escrito, pero es este escrito o WhatsApps o podríamos, bueno, Twitter ya no, pero se podría hacer un corpus con comentarios de TikTok, es decir,
Sí,
no
sí.
es tanto, yo creo, hoy en día ya el medio que se ha escrito, sino simplemente es la plataforma o el contexto. Porque yo creo que nunca he aprendido más sobre formación de palabras en inglés que en estos contextos. Geren se ríe porque sabe, ¿no?, que me conoce, pero es que realmente, por ejemplo, yo fandom nunca lo había oído o leído tanto como en mi época de Tumblr, porque en Tumblr es donde iba la gente de fandoms de series, etcétera, pues a hablar de sus intereses. Entonces, yo creo que no es tanto oral, que de hecho eso nos va mejor a los investigadores porque significa que nos ahorramos la transcripción, sino encontrar una forma sistemática de extraer este tipo de textos. Ya está. Y con esto me voy, que tengo una tutoría. Muchísimas gracias. Perdón.
No, nada, muchas gracias. Jonathan, sí, sí.
Mil gràcies. And then in the technical profile you also have y mucho de uso informal en el Tenten, Estenten, Tenten, and so on, todos los Tenten. Pero
Vale.
sigue siendo eso, siempre falta, ¿no? O sea, pero bueno, está bien que se empiece a incluir. En fin, yo también tengo una tutoría ahora a las 5. Son las manos de hacer tutorías. Pero os podéis quedar, si queréis seguir comentando o si ya tenéis... Pues, lo mejor lo que tendríamos que hacer es seguir hablando de esto otro día y si pudiera ser presencial todavía sería más agradable al menos, ¿no? Interesante no, pero sí más agradable podernos ver en directo todos. Queda ahí otra que tiene otra reunión a las 5.
Normal.
Ya se han ido, pero no, en serio, yo creo que son intereses compartidos y temas que realmente son relevantes, con lo cual nos tendríamos que ir emplazando para seguir hablando de ello juntos. Porque realmente ha sido un placer, de verdad, Jesús, mil gracias otra vez.
A vosotros.
Por haber aceptado compartir este rato con nosotros.
Muy bien, he estado muy a gusto y me lo he pasado muy bien.
Gràcies, de veritat. I nada, i moltes gràcies a tothom per haver-se conectat y participat. Como siempre, ahora terminará el vídeo. En un par de días lo tendremos ya colgado en nuestro super canal de YouTube y podrá acceder más. Las personas que sabemos que querían conectarse, pero les coincidía y no podían, pero para seguir pensando en todo esto. Mil gracias, de verdad.
Muy bien.
Voy a parar la grabación.